The unfortunate truth is that we are addicted to opioids because some of us more than others are really addicted to money and will do anything and hurt anybody to get it. But we as a people, if we're going to use money, we'll be much better off if we direct it in better, more healthy ways. One country in particular had great success about 15 years ago when they redirected their efforts from enforcement to treatment. And they have had some amazing results.
If you look at what Portugal has done, for example, which is to decriminalize exactly what Jagmeet is proposing in terms of possession and personal use, I think they have they have the results to show for it.
15 years ago, heroin users shot up in the streets and junkies set up tent cities. Then, instead of doing what we've done, they tried something different. They decriminalized every drug. Crack, heroin, you name it.
Arguably, no place in the world has had as much success dealing with addictions and overdoses as Portugal. Its system emphasizes harm reduction, treatment, and rehabilitation. And at the center of it is the idea that drug use is a health problem, not a crime. Drug traffickers are still hunted down and prosecuted, but if you're caught using, you won't be sent to jail or get a criminal record or even end up in the justice system.
What we found out in Portugal after 15 years is that using any sort of stick or any sort of threat doesn't work. If you increase the penalties for drug users, there's the usage decrease. It doesn't.
The Portuguese learned that lesson in the late 1990s when enforcement was practiced as the main solution to a horrible drug crisis. The country of 10 million people had up to 100,000 addicts. That's an astounding 1% of the population that was hooked on hard drugs.
Portugal was losing the war on drugs in desperation. With 200,000 addicts in a country of just 10 million, the government is trying a radical new approach.
In the year 2000, Portugal had the worst drug problem in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin. It was mind-blowing. And every year they tried the American way, and every year the problem got worse and worse. So they got together, and then they got a panel of scientists and doctors and said, look, tell us what will genuinely solve this. And the panel came back and said, decriminalize everything, from cannabis to crack, everything. But, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we used to spend on arresting drug users, imprisoning drug users, all of that, take that and spend it on really good drug treatment. And it's not drug treatment like we think of it in the US. Some of it is like rehab. Mostly it's about reconnecting addicts with society.
Is legalization. We have the most liberal model in the world.
Drug use is treated more like a parking ticket than a crime. People caught with drugs, like this man found with hash, get a slap on the wrist, sometimes a fine.
For us, the drug addict is not anymore a crime. It's a person to need to be treated, to need to have support, but to need to have a kind of answer that is not just saying, poor guy, you need the treatment, and just supporting the treatment and the treatment and the treatment. They need also to know that they have rules to do it.
Portugal still doesn't sanction the sale of drugs. That's illegal. But users are not treated as criminals.
Fernando has been a heroin addict for more than 10 years, but now instead of court and jail, there's a new path ahead. Fernando is sent to one of 18 newly established drug commissions scattered throughout Portugal. Instead of a judge, he faces a panel including a psychologist, a social worker and a doctor. Since last July, addicts like Fernando, caught with less than 10 days' supply, are sent to drug treatment centres. After that, there'll be help with housing and jobs.
What they did wasn't really what we think of as drug treatment in the United States and Britain. So they do residential rehab, they do psychological therapy that does have some value. But the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do. A massive program of job creation for addicts and microloans for addicts to set up small businesses. So say you used to be a mechanic. When you're ready, they go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of bed for in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, it's fascinating. What they said is, as they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered bonds and relationships with the wider society.
Within a decade, the number of addicts in Portugal was cut in half. 90% of public money spent fighting drugs now goes towards treatment and prevention. Just 10% is spent on policing.
Now, I totally realize that for a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world, this idea of decriminalization is very scary and very frightening. Yet, we need to look at where it's actually been done, to look at who's been successful with it, because there has been success with it.
I interviewed the guy who led the opposition to the decriminalization. The top drug cop, his name's João Figueira, right? He said all the Fox News things, and there was a lot of resistance to this in Portugal, like there would be in the US, right? He said all the things that a lot of your viewers are going to be thinking perfectly reasonably. And when I interviewed him, he said, everything I said would happen, didn't happen.
Right.
And everything the other side said would happen did. And he talked about how he was ashamed that he'd spent 20 years arresting drug users, and he hoped the whole world followed our example. And I really think, the one thing you can say for the drug war is we gave it a fair shot, right?
Yeah. Many detractors feared that the country would become dependent on drug tourism, but that didn't happen either. Instead, Portugal has seen a significant decline in sexually transmitted disease, overdoses, and rates of HIV and AIDS.
I know Americans like to think that we're the most innovative country on the planet, but sometimes these older countries know a little bit better, and they try things that are a little bit more daring, and a lot of times they work. We need to look at the way Portugal is doing things, and the Netherlands, and England, and these other countries that are having much greater success and a lot less death than we are.
In all of Portugal, fewer than 30 people a year now die from drug overdoses.
But I think we should actually listen to facts and adjust our strategy. The war on drugs is a horrible, abysmal failure. It's time to end it. It's time to decriminalize these drugs so that we have less gang warfare, less killing, less people locked up for no reason, and actually less drug addicts.